So my work is with metaphor, and I often get asked, what's the difference between a metaphoric image and a regular image? A metaphoric image is alive. It's awake. It has something it wants to say to you. To give you a simple example, let's suppose we have an image of one of those old-fashioned freezers before there was such a thing as an automatic defroster. And inside the freezer compartment, it's really thick with ice. This could be just a literal image. But if it's a metaphoric image, it has something it wants to say to you. It might be telling you that you're boxed in, and if you could simply thaw out the walls that are surrounding you in your life, you'd feel much better. Or perhaps it's telling you that you need some warmth in your life, or that you need a small space right now to feel safe. Another example is, we could make the statement, Ted is like a freight train, which is very interesting, but it doesn't take you anywhere. We have Ted, and we have a freight train, and we have some similarities between the two. But if we said, Ted is a freight train, that statement doesn't make sense to our rational minds. Of course, Ted isn't a freight train. And whenever we're working with something that our mind doesn't understand, it gives up, and our imagination is able to take over. That's one way we enter the metaphoric dimension. We humans draw on metaphor whenever we're dealing with something that our minds can't understand. Unexpected life events, times when we feel confused or overwhelmed, or whenever we're stepping into something that's unknown or uncertain, we grasp for metaphor to make meaning. We might say, I'm in over my head, or I don't feel grounded, or I feel small. These are metaphors, and they give us not only an image, but they give us a feeling sense. And that feeling sense is very important. That feeling sense gives us a direction, and I'll say more about that later. Metaphor is the primary way in which new ideas are introduced into the culture. It's the heart of the creative process, as I said before. The physicist Niels Bohr and his work on the atomic structure and quantum theory was inspired by the metaphor of cubism and cubist paintings. Chaos theory, cloud technology, having a desktop on your computer, the examples of metaphor in the scientific realm are infinite. When scientists or any of us try to create something new or introduce a new idea, we have to use metaphor. And in the case of every historic scientific discovery and invention that is researched carefully enough, we find that it was metaphoric imagery which produced the breakthrough. As many wise men have said, Carl Jung, Einstein, etc., problems aren't solved on their own level. We have to go to a place that's higher, a place that resolves the polarities. Metaphor runs throughout our culture, of course, but it's underground. It's under the surface of how we view things and what we do and say. It shapes our learning and our perspective in ways we're not even aware of. It's not something we pay attention to because it's underneath the level of language. I'm just going to give you a quick example. Many years ago, I attended a large conference on social change, and one of the keynote speakers was talking about his work protecting the rainforest. And as he spoke, it was clear that the primary metaphor that was driving his work was war. He was at war with the large corporations and others that were plundering the rainforest. Now, his work could be guided by a different key metaphor. And the question is the key metaphor that's guiding his work that is so important in this world, is that image generative and expansive and healing? Is it taking his work into new possibilities, into new creative terrain? Or is the focus and perspective, the lens that he's looking through, is it keeping him and his work stuck and small? Because when we're in a polarity with something or some organization or some person, we're stuck. Many of our unconscious metaphoric images are coming from our culture, from our egos, from our fearful minds. They're not coming from this amazing aesthetic dimension of beauty and creative possibility. All of you are living your lives by primary guiding metaphors. And each situation that you encounter in life, each little problem that needs to be addressed, each relationship in your life, they all hold metaphoric lenses. The question is that metaphoric lens serving you? How might it be more expansive and more generative? There is a dimension that we can tap into that will open up your life, expand whatever it is you're doing, and show you new opportunities, creativity, and resources that you never would have known were available to you. When I work with clients in doorway sessions, we step into the metaphor, which brings us to this other dimension, the feeling dimension. And we learn and navigate our way around this dimension by feeling. I grew up in a farming family in Iowa. My father was a farmer, his father before him, and generations beyond that. So growing things in the soil have always been key images for me. This dimension is like fertile soil. The example I often give is to imagine that you're a worm in the soil. You can't see your way ahead. You navigate your way in the soil by feeling. Albert Einstein described it as a feeling for the order lying behind the appearance. So this dimension that we're working with here, the metaphoric realm, is real. And when something is alive, you can feel it. When you discover or receive a healing metaphor in this realm, the feeling sense of it is the key to the shift. It's the key to the breakthrough, to a new way of being and knowing. Feeling is how we connect with the creative forces of the universe. The law of attraction says that to manifest anything new, we need to feel what it's like to have it. Metaphor allows us to do that. Metaphor allows us to feel and be what our souls want to manifest in the world. And feeling, of course, is not the same thing as emoting. Raw, undirected emotion like anger, fear, rage, frustration, grief actually gets in the way of our ability to step into and feel the subtle wisdom of a metaphoric image. In fact, our minds often interpret metaphoric images like darkness or caves or ropes as negative. But we're working with the creative process when we work with metaphor, so none of these images are actually negative. The creative process is always in movement. We might be moving from something closed to something more expansive, but we're never stuck. The dimension that we step into is a realm of creative possibility. We have infinite space available to us to create and manifest new things, including new ways of being and new perspectives. And so because we're stepping into the image, simpler images tend to be much more powerful than complex images. With metaphor, if there's a lot of complexity, our minds get involved in analyzing it. And as I said, this is about feeling and letting that feeling shift you into a different space. In some ways, it's similar to pulling a tarot card. When we pull a tarot card, we don't sit and analyze the image of the Empress on the card. The Empress card is a pointer to the wisdom that you're seeking. It's not about the card itself. So the images are a starting point for us to step into this dimension, this symbolic, metaphoric dimension. Just like if you would step into a movie, although what we're stepping into is a real place, a real space. It's not make-believe. We're working with a subtle energy in this dimension. The images that show up shift our cells and shift our vibratory energies. as you noticed with the cloud exercise. After we've stepped into the image and felt its wisdom, that image continues to work us in a non-cognitive way. We don't need to spend time analyzing it or figuring it out. The shift in this dimension comes in feeling it in your body. When you've done that, you've experienced its wisdom. The work is gentle, beautiful, and directional, and it has a way that it wants to move. This is the creative movement of life. I find this dimension fascinating. It's fascinating to me how real it is, and how exquisitely beautiful and intense it is, and how it's a very powerful source of change in life, and yet our culture doesn't see it or value it. And I want to thank you all for being pioneers with me. There are many examples throughout history of cultural change happening by someone finally being able to see something. For example, we've probably all heard the story of Columbus's ships out at sea, and the shaman on the tribe couldn't see them at first. They were outside of his frame of reference. I've also heard about a tribe in Africa called the Himba tribe that can't see the color blue. If there's a blue square next to a lot of green squares, they think they're all green. They can't see the blue square. To our Western eyes, the blue square is screaming out for attention, but they can't see it. And I'm not saying this to give an example of how superior we are, because our culture has many things that we don't see, and this realm is one of them. Another thing that's fascinating to me is how our minds believe that complex problems require complex solutions. So we work so hard trying to come up with complex plans and schedules. But what's true is that when we shift our energy, when we shift our perspective, everything changes. An example of that might be, say we have some problem that's been eating away at us, and then we have the opportunity to get in a spacecraft and zoom out into space and see planet Earth from a far, far distance. I'm sure that whatever issue we had in our regular life is going to be forgotten in the midst of that profound shift of perspective and witnessing the immense beauty of planet Earth. That's what happens when we step into this realm, when we really step into it. We see and feel things differently.